good evening. Welcome back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan, and with my friend with the spectacles this week, Julio Vela.
How are you, sir?
Are you trying to up your IQ? What are you trying to do?
Well, you know, when you get old, the eyes get tired.
Well, I know about getting tired.
The eyes get tired.
For sure. But you can wear those without it giving you a headache?
No, because they're completely fake. So.
Oh, so you're just doing it to look smart.
Yeah. We had the out-of-county appearance today.
What do you think? Just because we got a bunch of scientists on the show tonight, you gotta look smart?
I can't fool this group of the brainiest people I've ever met.
Exactly. We're lucky tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be joined by 3 members from the Houston Forensic Science Center. We're going to talk about DNA and a bunch of other stuff. We hope this is the first in a series of 3 episodes we're going to do with these fine individuals. And we're going to try, hopefully, to do one out at the lab. We're going to see if we can make that work. I don't know. We're going to see. We're crossing our fingers and hoping it'll work. But let's introduce our panel for tonight. So first we have Courtney Head. Courtney, thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
And Dr. Peter Stout with us tonight. You're back. This is your second time on the show.
My spectacles are not fake.
Right.
Sorry.
Mine aren't either.
I actually have old eyes, so.
They're not.
And finally, Katherine Morgan. Katherine, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So you guys get to be in the hot seat for the next hour. If you want to get in on our conversation, we're going to open up the phone lines probably about halfway through the show. 713-807-174 is the number right there at the bottom of your screen. We also have Twitter up at HCCLA_TV, so you can send questions and comments there. So whoever wants to start, let's start with the big news this week. The announcement that you guys are going to be outsourcing DNA testing to hopefully eliminate this backlog, and you're going to be helping train and bring in a private laboratory to help with that.
Well, close. I mean, what we're looking to do is, and Courtney can talk about this because there's a lot of the plan is what she's put together, but you got to keep in mind what we're talking for backlog. What we mean by backlog is we measure from the point at which the agency makes a request, when HPD makes a request, to the point at which we get the final report out the door. And we want that under 30 days. So keep in mind as you look around the country, everybody measures that a little differently. There are labs out there that'll measure that from when they receive the evidence to when they get the report out, from when they actually open the seal on the evidence to when they get the report out. Some will do that to when they get a draft report, but not necessarily the final report. So there's a lot of different measurements on that. And even like here in the state, DPS looks at sexual assault kit is backlogged if it's more than 90 days. So if we use that measurement, we'd have, what, a couple dozen, I think, that would be backlogged. But our concern is to get that under 30 days because that's what matters to y'all trying to deal with.
So let me ask you this. So examine what within 30 days and why within 30 days?
Well, so 30 days is something, as we've talked with HPD and others, that seems to be a pretty good mark for what's useful for the investigations, what's useful for the process outside of just the laboratory. Now, there's some evidence that we have to do a whole lot faster about that, and actually when we talk about firearms stuff, that's a good example of evidence that we try to get, there are components of that we try to get done within 24 to 48 hours. Like toxicology evidence and alcohols, we try to get those done within 2 weeks. So 30 days is kind of the marker for where we'd like to see everything under that, but there are components that we got to get done a lot faster than that.
Do you believe you have the resources to do that within 30 days?
In a lot of places, I think we're getting close to that. I mean, it's just like all laboratories, and actually I guess it looks like I may be heading to go testify to a congressional committee next week about some of the resource issues for laboratories across the whole country. Resources are always tight for laboratories.
Yeah, it seems like this is a big problem across the country.
Yeah.
I mean, there's multiple lawsuits. There's one here. There was one just filed this week up in Travis County.
Yep.
This seems to be an ongoing problem across the country with delays in getting DNA evidence back.
Yeah.
So, what is the hope that outsourcing this to the private lab is going to alleviate?
So I think it will help alleviate in our laboratory. We have a lot of very new analysts, and so from the moment we hire someone, it's not like on day 2 they can just start working and we can hand them cases. It can be up to 12 months and maybe a little bit longer to get someone fully trained in order to be able to really start helping us work cases. And so because we have so many cases that are coming in constantly every day, we've really been unable to focus on training the staff that we have in the lab. And so our process is kind of a three-step process where we do screening, and then we do lab work, and then we ultimately write the DNA report, draw conclusions, and get that final product out to our stakeholders. And so in training individuals, we consistently try to start training, and then more cases are coming in consistently. And so we haven't had an opportunity where we can really focus on training, because we always have to pull people from training, put them back into working some aspect of casework. And so we have a lot of people in the lab that are kind of stuck in that first part of the process, and we need more people on the end part of the process. We have a bottleneck in the middle of our system.
What you say some people stuck, and do we have individuals that are being trained in a variety of different forensic sciences, or?
No, these are all within just biology.
So within biology,
right.
what within biology are we talking about, and are you, I mean, and so you're putting people back in the rotation, but I mean, what specific acts within biology are you talking about?
So the first step of our process is serology, and that's just basically screening evidence for the presence of blood or semen. And so if you watch CSI, those quick color change tests that turn green or pink, we do that in the lab, and we can get people trained pretty quickly to be able to do that process. But the next step of the process is a little more complicated, and it takes longer to get someone trained to do DNA extraction and use our automation, and some of the chemistries that we have in the lab are pretty sophisticated. And then to take that a step further is actually looking at that data, drawing conclusions, using the appropriate statistics, and then generating a report.
Is your technology on par with the country?
Yes.
Is it higher? Is it less? Are you leading?
We definitely have a lot of automation, and so we're a fairly large laboratory. We have about 40 people in our lab, and so we have more automation than a lot of small crime labs, which is helps us be more efficient. The chemistries that are available are commercially available, and so most labs choose one of 3 different kits that help them get to the conclusions for DNA testing.
Catherine, so you're a DNA analyst.
Yes,
so I'm
that's
assuming
correct.
you're one of the foot soldiers who's going to be doing this stuff.
Yes.
So talk about for us and kind of give us an insight into, you know, what the training process is like, what it's like coming into the Houston Forensic Science Center, and kind of give a window of what Courtney was describing for someone coming on.
Okay, so as Courtney stated, whenever someone is initially hired on, they're generally put into the screening training initially. So that would be the first step that they would go through. That training alone takes several months. At that point, if necessary or if it's possible, we would put them into the technician training, which would also take a period of 3 to 6 months easily. At that point, a person would be possibly able to go on to what we call the report writing, which is the part where we look at the data that's been generated, we write a report, we perform comparisons and statistical analysis, and of course we would testify in court at times when necessary. So that's a very long process. It takes, all told, I would expect about a year of training for someone to come in from the beginning and do the whole thing.
Doctor, was this part of your design? Did you help plan this training period, and was this part of your vision of how you're taking the forensic community in Harris County to the next level? And 2, Harris County is a big deal, man.
Oh, yeah.
How have you handled that? Because Harris County, at least in the news and the reputation and the vibe, is that you're leading, that you're trying to lead some of these larger communities. You got New York, Chicago, LA, Houston, Atlanta. So 2, was this part of your design?
You know, I'm sure I'd love to take credit for all of it, but actually, you know, these are the folks that really understand the process. Courtney's, I think some of this was understanding all the resources that we needed, and actually listening to some of the really smart people that we have that have been saying for a while, you know, we need to have a period of time where we can actually get everybody cross-trained in all of these operations so we can shift people where the load goes. It is consistent problem in a lot of laboratories. And actually, I was Matthew Gamete, who's the president of American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors right now, was talking a little bit with him, and he was. I think general sentiment would be a lot of laboratories would like to have the opportunity to do what we're trying to do with this, of actually give the group enough time to get their arms around this and get ahead of some of this stuff. I think, to answer the second part of your question, I mean, I came here to this lab because of what Houston was, because past administrations and the citizens of Houston have really taken a pretty bold step at trying to run the laboratory something different.
Can you talk about the climate that Houston was when you came in, and what your idea was to take it to the next level? I mean, when Houston came, talk to you about when you came into Houston. I mean, Houston has been known notorious. We have the Bromwich files. Right. We have a reputation of hiding evidence, junk science, incredible evidence. Tampering, officers not doing what they're supposed to, science not being all that it's supposed to be. And I remember the big to-do when you came through. How did you handle that?
Well, I joke about it that, I know people in Africa who know what Houston was, because I actually know people in Africa who know what Houston is. Houston is internationally renowned. And it's not so much that what Houston had going is something that other laboratories in the country haven't had. I mean, Andy Dukin was in Massachusetts. There's the same kind of issues everywhere. It's the scale of what's here at Houston. I mean, this laboratory with 200 employees and 25-ish to 30,000 requests a year is one of at least the 5 largest laboratories in the country. We're about half the size of the entire DPS system spread between 13 labs. I mean, this is a big laboratory.
Are you taking in requests from other agencies?
We've got a little bit of that. Really, while we're set up and there's the possibility for us to do that, we've got a few contracts with some of the outlying counties. It's not really been the focus right now. I mean, the focus has been getting the core work for the city of Houston straight.
So we're talking DNA. There's a backlog. We've hired, upon leadership, we've hired an out-of-county a private entity to review these things.
Well, it's not review.
Well, I don't know. Tell me. I don't know.
Yeah, so I want to get to that. The press release says you have 950 requests that are over 30 days old. And 200 of those are sexual assault kits, commonly known as rape kits, that haven't been tested.
No, that's...
Or have they?
Yeah, so they're all in process. Everything in that's all in process. Basically, you could look at the process of where we're at because
I think that's the narrative that's out there in the mainstream media is that these cases haven't been tested at all, and that they're just sitting there and nobody's looked at them. And so they're just sitting on a shelf somewhere collecting dust.
No, these are all in process. Everything has actually pretty well been through the laboratory end of it. It's all waiting data analysis. So this is what Courtney's been doing.
What do you mean about waiting for data analysis?
As we mentioned, there are several main steps in the process, and once we get to the point where we've generated data, that we have a ton of data to look at. And right now, we only have 6 people who are qualified to look at that data. The other problem we face is that we are the most qualified people to train someone else to look at that data because we do it every day and we're experienced. So really, right now, we have 6 people looking at the data and writing reports. 3 of those people are also training new analysts to be able to do that. So really, we have 3 people who can completely commit to looking at that data.
So the private lab, I mean, they're not retesting.
No.
Okay, so what exactly is who is the private lab?
Don't know yet.
Okay, so are you bidding that out? Is the city bidding?
We're shopping that out.
So we don't have a lab yet.
Don't have a lab
yet. The plan is to put it there.
We'll have that soon.
And the budget is $2 million.
Roughly, yeah.
Okay, which I mean, frankly, that's not.
And about half of that will be grant money, federal grant money. Right. And the other half is coming out of basically what we've found in efficiencies and cost savings elsewhere in the laboratory.
So what is the private lab going to do exactly? If it's already been tested, what are they going to help you do?
In-house, we're going to work on what we call our backlog, all of the cases that we've already started testing. And so the plan is new casework that comes in the door, we'll be sending to an outsourced lab so that it will help alleviate our burden to train, work incoming casework, and work the backlog. So we're going to focus in-house on the backlog and training and let the outsourced lab take all of our new casework, except for things that are priorities and rushes, things we need to work on in-house.
Yeah, the press release said that priority DNA cases identified by the Houston Police Department as urgent will continue to be completed in-house. So typically, what's considered urgent?
So I think a case that's obviously going to trial, we get notifications on that. It seems pretty regularly that it's going in 30 days. So we'd want to make sure that we keep something like that in-house. Something that's a threat to public safety, we of course would want to keep that in-house. And so there's various different things from the different divisions. Homicide and sexual assault seem to have the most priority cases, but there do seem to be the occasional robberies and things like that that we need to make sure we prioritize.
So you say in the press release, you say you expect about 10 months. Mm-hmm. You think that you guys can clear the backlog in 10 months and, you know, have the private lab in the interim kind of be the stopgap to help you with the incoming new cases, and then in 10 months be able to basically take everything over again?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what we're looking at. And over the last about 2 years, we've done a lot of analysis of the whole process. I think we've got much better understanding from a data-driven decision-making of understanding just how many analysts we need to handle how many cases, just where we need to put the people. So we're not just taking guesses at where we need that. We've got a lot of solid data in order to make those decisions and be able to make the plans that they've made for just how long we need this to run, just how many we need to try and push out.
You're gonna need highly trained, well-educated, which y'all are, people who testify in court. Mm-hmm. And it seems like y'all two are at the top of the line, but y'all got to train some people, I suppose. Are you recruiting anybody? Are you recruiting other recruits from, you know, I mean, putting some feelers out there? Because
we've actually hired in a number of, how many? We got 3 or 4 that have just come in that are experienced analysts that we've just hired in. We've hired in a new person to coordinate the training, so we actually have a dedicated person dealing with the training, and that'll be ongoing because there's always a training need.
So none of the private lab employees will be testifying in court. Is that, I mean, or
well, I mean, I'm gonna have to talk to somebody.
It's a possibility.
Talk to somebody.
So
because I mean, they're going to be doing, if they're going to be doing the incoming cases, and stopping there for a second, what's the thought behind why you're going to keep the urgent cases in-house if you're trying to clear the backlog and then have them do all the other cases? What's the thought on that?
Right. So we have a couple of options. I think because we haven't selected the outsourced laboratory, we don't exactly know what their turnaround time is going to be.
Right.
So if their turnaround time is 60 days and a case needs to be done in 30 days, then we have to make the decision if that's one we want to keep in-house or if we can prioritize that with the outsourced lab, maybe pay an additional fee or something to get them to rush that case through.
I have a DWI. I'm not going to go into the facts, I can't, but let's hypothetically say it's a drug case, toxicology came back. One of these shops out in Pennsylvania.
I know that shop.
All right. I got noticed today, or an email request, to see if that expert can testify via Skype. Mm-hmm. Have you considered these things?
Yep.
And as a defense perspective, I told her, no. I said, no. And she said, why, the prosecutor? I said, because I got to see the body. I got to see that body. With the questions I ask and what I'm going to ask them, I need to see how they react. I need the jury to see how they react. However, she said, judge lets it come by Skype. And I know the judge very well. I've never heard it and I've never seen it happen. But, so let me ask twofold. Jimmy, as a defense lawyer extraordinaire, tried...
Let's not get too carried away.
Well, between you and I, we've probably tried 100 cases under our belt. I mean, for sure.
Yeah.
As a defense perspective, what do you think about Skype or videoing experts, and from an individual who's running the one of the largest forensic science labs in the country? Mm-hmm. What is your take on videoing in testimony?
I frankly don't have a problem with it because I think at some point we're probably going to be doing virtual trials as technology improves. Most witnesses are going to be appearing in some form or fashion in video. I mean, I think it's going to, at some point, become a pretty regular occurrence. So, yeah, I mean, as much as we'd like to have a live witness there, I just think, practically speaking, and with some of this stuff, I think technology is going to make it more accessible and more reliable to have people appear via video in trial. I mean, look, they do it a lot of time in civil cases.
It's a
Have
really,
you all considered this?
well, it's a real mixed bag around the country. I mean, we actually have quite the privilege and luxury of being a municipal laboratory serving the Houston area. We really don't have to consider it that much. You know, the places where we've done some outsourcing, toxicology is one of the places we've outsourced, and actually, that's one, I think we also put out something with that because all that stuff's now coming, actually this last week came back in to toxicology. So drug stuff going forward will be done in-house.
Really?
Right, because we had, I mean, toxicology is another example of this, we used outsourcing while we rebuilt toxicology. And it took us a couple of years to rebuild toxicology.
What do you mean by that, rebuild toxicology?
We blew away all the methods in there. We've rebuilt, revalidated all the methods, replaced a lot of the equipment, brought in a lot of new people.
By your design?
Well, I'm a toxicologist. That was one of the first things that came in, and looking at toxicology and knowing that the point when I came in, there were some serious problems in there. And so we made the choice of how we changed and revalidated the alcohols, and then really the only way we were going to get the drugs back to where they needed to be was find a place for the work to go while the group can rebuild what they did there. We did something similar in latent prints. We did something similar with CSU. So, you know, as corny as it sounds, it's trying to build the fix that sticks. You got to give the group enough time to actually, we got really smart people in there. They're really committed, they're really dedicated. You got to give them enough space and time to be able to do it.
Were y'all a part of this kind of, how long have y'all been in your positions, and were y'all a part of this? And is this something that I mean, y'all are obviously very experienced. You either worked here for a while or worked somewhere else before. Were you a part of this kind of transition to make Houston better? Did you come along upon this new kind of chapter, or when did you come along?
I've worked at Houston Forensic Science Center / the Houston Police Department Crime Lab for 8.5 years. And so I did work as a part of HPD, and when I first started, there was 15 people in the biology and DNA section, and now we're close to 40. So,
how did you get into the biology? DNA? I didn't even know there was a biology section in HPD. Like, are you serious? There's a biology section in HPD? Where'd you go to school? And how'd you get involved in HPD?
She took classes while we were partying. Okay, she took actual classes while you and I were taking underwater basket weaving. She took classes that actually mattered and learned real stuff. So that's how it happened.
I took underwater blind basket weaving.
Without your glasses?
Yeah.
No glasses.
They're fake. No, they're not fake. No, but I'm serious. So how long were you at the HPD, and then where'd you go from there?
Yeah, no, so I've been here in Houston for 8.5 years. So before that, I worked in Dallas for a little while, and then I got my master's at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So I actually worked at an outsourced lab for 4 years before getting into more like county and city labs.
Where'd you, master's in what?
I got my master's in forensic science with a concentration in forensic molecular biology.
Wow. And your undergrad was what?
Biology.
Right, I knew that. I was going to say government?
Close.
Julio's closest experience with biology is dissecting the frog in high school.
It was close.
That's real close.
And he was done.
And
what about you? Where'd you go to school, and who are you? Talk to me.
Katherine, I went to...
You introduced her at the beginning of the show.
I know this. I'm fascinated by these individuals here.
I received my undergraduate in biology at University of Houston.
Okay.
I worked at a couple of different research labs on campus, and I worked as a chemist for about a year for a lab that does testing on transformer oil. After that, I decided to go and complete what I really had always wanted to do, which was to work in forensics. So I went to University of North Texas Health Science Center.
Yeah, sure.
And my master's is in forensic genetics.
Genetics. Mm-hmm. You know, my dad has a it's a spinal cerebral ataxia, and so supposedly if he didn't pass it to me, my kids won't have it, right? But if he did, we're all screwed, and I have.
Are you asking for medical diagnosis?
Like, we're done for, man. It's terrible. However, and what about you? I mean, you've been on the show before.
I've been here before. So I've got a bachelor's in biology, University of Colorado, and then I've got a master's in environmental engineering from Colorado School of Mines. So, I'm the first one. I'm the first one in 4 generations in my family to not be in the oil industry. So the family joke is, and you ended up in Houston anyways.
Yeah.
Then I have a PhD in toxicology from University of Colorado again.
What made you pursue toxicology? I would love to be a toxicologist.
I think toxicology.
Still time, Julio. Still time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could be an expert. You could be hired as an expert.
I just don't know with that fourth kid. You have a ton of money.
Like, people would be hiring you left and right to opine about what the evidence may or may not say.
Yeah, well, toxicology, a lot of DUIs. That's where toxicologists all across the country are involved with a lot of that.
I want to back up for a little bit to the press release and the outsourcing of this. So there's going to be critics, of course. Okay. They're already out there chirping. They're going to say, why are we outsourcing this? I thought this was the purpose of setting up an independent lab.
Yep.
Why should we have to do this? You're going to get it from the defense bar. It's not reliable. The typical stuff that you're never going to satisfy those of us on the defense bar, because our job is to be, skeptics. You're going to get people who are watching the budget of the city. They're going to be skeptical of why we need this. So how do you answer those? What are your responses to those people who say, this shouldn't be done? Why do we need this?
Why can't we handle the reliability part? Because
Sure.
Components we need to do on the reliability.
Right. The reliability are you asking about the reliability of outsourced testing, or?
Sure. Yeah.
I mean,
those are going to be a number of the questions that people are going to criticize this for. Why do we spend the money setting up this lab? Why do we then have to outsource it? We're now potentially subjecting ourselves to more criticism about the reliability issues that we've had in the past, and the whole point of setting this up was to eliminate those questions.
Sure.
And now we're possibly exposing that again.
Well, training is important.
Yeah.
And so bottom line is you have to have good trained people in the right places doing the work. And so if we were to just skip through training and not spend the time that's necessary, then that's going to come out in poor work and not doing a great job testifying on the stand. And so we want to make sure that we're committed to doing that stuff up front, and so that the final product that we get at the end of this is what everyone expects, a really high quality DNA result. When we go up and testify, the juries are able to believe and understand what we're talking about. We believe that that's the most important thing. And so we have to be able to dedicate time to training. And so if we didn't have this opportunity, and this kind of same situation has been happening recurringly, and so that's why we don't have the right people in the right place, because we haven't had the luxury of just really focusing and dedicating time. And so that's why I feel that at the end of this, reliability is not going to be an issue, because we've been able to spend the time necessary.
We've got 6 really good people at that analyst in right now. It's just not enough. We had 40 people total in the group, and like Courtney said, we went from 15 to 40. So we've been able to find out of efficiencies across the rest of the laboratory in the shift from city employees to corporate employees that has created space within the same budget, because really our budget's been flat the last 3 years. So we have gotten, with an increasing workload, we've reduced turnaround times, we've improved quality, we've improved all of these systems, and we've expanded capacity, all within the same flat budget. So,
that's phenomenal.
Do you think you can continue to expand capacity, though, if you don't get an increase in budget? I mean, what if...
Obviously, there's places where that's going to break, and we can talk about that when we talk about firearms, because we've seen basically the work that goes into the database within firearms double over the last 4 years. And we've been able to...
The work?
Right.
Yeah.
So the number of weapons that we get has doubled in the last 4 years. And we've been able to keep pace with that up until very recently. Now, the other thing you got to keep in mind, and part of what's happened in biology, is things like Harvey, things like the freezes, things like we were planning for this before Harvey and the freezes, of changing our laboratory information management system, which is a huge core system. It touches everything the laboratory does.
It's a portal?
Well, so there's a client portal for that where people make requests, but this is basically the information management system that manages all of the casework, all of where everything is. I mean, it is the system of the lab, so it's big core system to change. The legacy system was okay, but it's got some issues, and we're trying to replace that. Have been for about a year now.
What were the issues with the legacy system?
You know, it's, boy, you get me on
sharing.
You get me on one of my soapboxes.
Is it sharing? What is it? I mean,
well, you got to keep in mind. Really, forensics is a very small industry. There's 411 publicly funded crime labs out there, and there's about 14,000 people that work in forensics across the whole country. So if you're manufacturing or you're a developer of a LIMS, one of these big data systems, you've maybe got 200 people to sell that to. So there are 4 main developers of LIMS in the country. All of them are tiny little companies. They're like 20, 30-person companies.
For the viewers, what's LIMS?
Oh, Laboratory Information Management System, LIMS. So there's very few products that we can select from. You walk into any laboratory in the country and you ask them about their LIMS, you will get the same answer: we hate our LIMS. Yep, they're nodding. Everybody hates their LIMS because we have very few products. They're all modestly okay products. Often, and I think that is what happened here, laboratories, because it was the first attempt that this laboratory had at a LIMS, and the deployment of it was imperfect.
Do you think that's a cause for some of the backlog?
Well, there's a lot of lost time that goes in that. I mean, we work all the time with having to adapt to shortcomings of the LIMS. People can't get data as quickly as they need. They can't interact with the system as quickly as they need. It doesn't do things that we would like it to do, and that's what we're trying to change into the new system, particularly with a section that's got as much automation as biology does. But you know, we just don't have that many choices on it. So you know, those limited choices are really frustrating because it seems like it should be easier than it is.
How many sections does your crime lab or forensic lab have?
We are what is referred to as a full-service crime lab. We have 7 disciplines, so it's from crime scene to toxicology, like we were just talking, firearms, like we'll talk about as well, seized drugs, controlled substances, pills, powders, green leafies, biology, latent prints, and digital multimedia evidence, so AV and cell phones.
That's phenomenal.
We got a phone call coming in.
All right.
After that, I want to go back to kind of some personnel questions that I have, but let's get the phone call in here real quick. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt. Hello.
My call. I have sort of a 3-part question concerning DNA evidence and specifically DNA mixture evidence, and I'll ask them all and take my answers off the air. When the problems with the DNA mixture evidence, specifically with the combined probability of inclusion evidence came up, there was problems in calculating the statistics because there was no stochastic threshold. I was wondering if the analysts could talk a little bit about what that means. What does stochastic threshold mean? And how does that correlate? Because before these problems came to light, the analysts would testify in court regarding this evidence with great confidence. And the last part of my question is, with the new testing, with probabilistic genotyping, how can we be so sure that this type of testing is better or has more confidence? Doesn't it too lack a stochastic threshold? And I'll take the answers off air. Thank you.
Thank you for the call. Who wants
How
to jump
high
on that?
level is that? That's what I'm telling you.
I'll try to remember
amazing.
all 3 parts of it. A stochastic threshold is a threshold in which more or less we're more comfortable that we have all of the data that's in the sample if the peaks have met a stochastic threshold. As far as the CPI is concerned, I have always, as in my experience, I've been here 5 years, we've always had a stochastic threshold. So I can't really speak to testifying without that. Maybe Courtney can a little bit. And as far as the probabilistic genotyping, that we've had some training on that. We're not implementing it quite yet. It doesn't necessarily change what mixture evidence you would use. It's just a different way of performing a statistic on that mixture evidence. So I don't know if that answers the question.
What's the stochastic threshold, and why can Courtney talk about things that you cannot?
I'm old. I'm old. I'm much older than she is. And so I've been there longer. So I can talk a little bit about not having a stochastic threshold, and what the caller was talking about was we've had to go back and do some recalculations, or maybe we haven't been able to recalculate because the stochastic threshold was not in place, and we're talking about, as Katherine said, beyond 5 years ago. And so technology has just changed over time. We've learned more about the science, we've learned more about the appropriate way to calculate statistics, and so therefore we want to make sure that we're doing the best with the data that we have. And so,
well, what's the stochastic threshold?
So as Katherine mentioned, we have a threshold in place in which any data that we have that's above that threshold, we are confident that we have all the data, because sometimes we get mixtures of DNA that we're missing data. It's partial data, it's not good data, and so we want to know that, do we have all the data? Is there anything that we should question, or are we missing information? And so that stochastic threshold lets us know if we're missing info.
What does that data sound like in a courtroom, though? I mean, you say data.
DNA.
I don't know what that means. I mean,
it's DNA. So a mixture is obviously more than one person's DNA there. And so when we look at data, it's literally peaks on a graph that are different color, and there's different sizes of the peaks. And so dependent on the size of the peak, it relates back to a threshold. And so if we can say it's a certain size and then it's above the size that we would anticipate, then we could say it's above our threshold. If it's smaller peaks, then it may not meet our threshold, and so we may question it, and we may believe that we don't have all of the information.
Does the threshold, you pass the threshold and you're able to present that evidence in court with a greater confidence? Is that my understanding of what you're saying?
That's a fair statement. We would be able to apply statistics to locations that we feel we're not missing data, and so it could change the statistical weight on a sample if we have all the data versus if we have less data. We might have a statistic of 1 in a quintillion if we have all the data. It might be 1 in a billion if we're missing information.
You know, recently there's been talk on the news and TV of, well, they got the formula wrong. It's not 1 in 10 quintillion. It's 1 in 100,000. Is that true, or is it not true, or is what I mean, something changed recently.
Right. I wouldn't say it was the formula that was wrong. It was the data and understanding, was that information, as the caller called in about, did it have a stochastic threshold? Because that's important. Because before we had a stochastic threshold, we didn't have a good way of identifying, could we potentially be missing data? And so maybe we used information that we shouldn't have 6 years ago because we didn't understand fully the appropriate way to make those statistical calculations. And this is a problem across the forensic community as a whole, definitely not just here.
Right.
So I mean, that begs the question. I mean, at what point can we really truly rely on this information? If thresholds are changing, if statistical analysis are changing, I mean, you know, if it's different from what it was 6 years ago, and you're saying, well, maybe we didn't understand that. Mm-hmm. I mean, people were convicted 6 years ago under this evidence.
Yep.
Right.
So, you know,
part of the change in science.
Ultimately,
yeah, I mean,
what we've seen with the calculations and going back and looking at this evidence, there's not massive changes. In samples that were single source or even these mixtures that are super high, we don't have changes. The only spots that come into question are the data that's really low. And so in those situations, obviously we know now that that's stuff that we should shy away from and perhaps not be so aggressive and try to make those finite conclusions.
Now, something I will say, though, is here in Texas, looking at this across the nation, you can have a mixed bag of how people have approached this. Texas is a state that has been very proactive about this. Texas has actually taken it upon themselves to go look back at old cases. I mean, tens of thousands of cases are being evaluated. I think we've had, what, 8,000 total that were notified on this, 8,000 or 9,000, something like that?
Yeah.
So that's, you know, the DA's office went back looking back at cases historically where CPI has been used, and we've been working with PDO, Public Defender's Office, and the DA's office to help evaluate, okay, this was a case that had CPI calculated in it. It was probative to the case. It was necessary.
You said CPI. What does that mean?
It's combined probability of inclusion. So we look at 21 different locations in the DNA. And in the past, on a mixture, we were using a CPI calculation. And with a CPI calculation, you can only use the locations in which you're confident that you don't have data missing. That's where the stochastic threshold comes into play with CPI. With probabilistic genotyping, you can use locations in which you may have something missing, but the calculation accounts for that possibility. So it's just a different type of statistical calculation on a mixture than we've done in the past.
As a scientist, do you feel more comfortable speaking about or giving these? It sounded like one's a prediction, one's pretty solid. Or is it not?
They're calculated different ways. They're calculated different ways, and it's everybody. It is, it's a confidence rattling change that's happened with DNA. DNA for a while was viewed as the gold standard. It was viewed as nearly infallible, and no scientific measurement and test is infallible. All scientific measurements have some degree of error. So now as we've started to look at mixtures and the complexities of mixtures and what really can be interpreted out of those mixtures, you're seeing where the limits are of this. And there's going to be more of this. The one that's likely, I think I've heard, will be, we've known about it for a while, we've heard about it at meetings a lot, but it's not been published, is one called Mix 13. So National Institute of Standards has put out, ever since, a lot of this rolls back to what are called pop stats and some of the, I guess, miscalculations, small miscalculations in the underlying population statistics that they use to then calculate CPI. So it's about like, just how big a dice you roll to then calculate the probabilities on things.
Well, back to your question about whether or not I feel more comfortable with one or the other. I feel like it's not necessarily an issue of whether I feel more comfortable with one or the other, but it goes back to the fact that we need to really have well-trained analysts and well-educated analysts, because it's more about understanding what goes into the calculation, how to use it appropriately, and understanding the limits of that calculation and being able to express that to a jury. That's really what it comes down to.
Because even like the probabilistic genotyping, that is software that uses algorithms to try and basically tease apart these very complex mixtures. That's great, there's a lot of power in that, but they are at root an algorithm that the analyst has to understand, because if they don't understand it, they may put information in and get an answer out the other end that isn't necessarily reliable.
Or testify in court.
Right.
And not be reliable.
And there's an awful lot of conversation in all
it's a big deal, man.
Of where is testimony being overstated, where is testimony being appropriately stated, the language that's used, everybody talking about the,
Vessel Gale? Remember her?
Yeah. But the comments of what is it? Degree of scientific certainty, whatever this stupid phrase is that gets used out there that doesn't have any meaning, and it's trying to put statistical meaning into these things, and it's a growth part of the science in all of the disciplines.
Well, but I mean, isn't that the frustrating thing from our standpoint as defense lawyers is this stuff is presented in court as infallible. Yep. And here you are saying, look, every test, every scientific thing has some degree of fallibility. Yep. I mean, the problem I see with that is, how do you get beyond a reasonable doubt if there's some degree of fallibility?
We got cheers back there.
Yeah. You have a damn good crime lab, I suppose.
Some of it, so from the laboratory standpoint, I view it that our role and responsibility in this is to give as clear a measurement as we can, and as clear a statement of what that uncertainty is, and as best we can, the error around that measurement. That's y'all's thankless task to try and figure out how to wrestle through. Right.
I mean, we've got to figure out how to bring all these big words down and make them where people can understand them.
But it is the reality of scientific measurements. Right. All scientific measurement has some degree of error to it.
Fallibility.
Right.
Did I make that up right now? Fallibility?
No, he said it.
I think it's something better than that. Pretty sure.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
And I also wanted to point out, it depends on how we're testifying. So if we have a statistic of 1 in 100, to make sure that the jury understands that that's not a great statistic. That means 1 out of 100 people.
Yeah, I mean, if the odds were 1 out of 100 that your team was going to win the championship, would you put money on it?
Right.
Kind of thing. I don't think anybody in this room would.
Trying to be able to explain the difference between a statistic that's 1 in 100 versus 1 quintillion, which is 300 times the Earth population, and to make sure that our analysts are able to convey that message, and also trying to educate the attorneys to make sure that they understand what they're presenting and not trying to over-present a statistic of 1 in 100, because I've seen that done before.
Have you testified in court?
Yes.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, so first thing we think about
Look out.
is like, you know, well, we're talking about DNA, so first thing is rape. We think about rape. Terrible subject. We're just going to, right here, and we're going to put it over there. What other cases do we have DNA on?
Homicide?
Oh, murder.
Aggravated assaults.
Property
Assaults.
Property crimes.
Robbery.
Property crimes.
Robbery.
Where's the
Burglaries.
DNA? That's what I say.
Right.
That's what I say.
That's what everyone says.
Where's
That's
the
why we have a
DNA?
backlog. That's why we have a backlog.
So let's talk about DNA. Okay, so there's, touch DNA, breathe DNA, flake DNA. What types of DNA? Obviously, bodily human fluids. Okay, we'll do that one. However, what kind of DNA can you actually extract? Can I take a drink of something over here, and then you go and I leave it, and someone comes and swoops it up, and then they do a piece of tape, and they take my thumbprint, and then you can get my DNA from that?
Probably not from your thumbprint. Maybe. There's probably a scientific paper out there that would happen like that. But if you leave your bottle sitting somewhere, ideally someone would come and swab the lip of the bottle, because that's where you're going to be contacting the bottle frequently, and your saliva will be deposited there most likely. And so we could get a DNA profile. Right. We could get a DNA, swab that right there. Likely we would get his DNA profile. But if we swab the outside of the cup, maybe he shares his cup with you.
Right.
And if we swab that, then maybe we get a mixture of both of y'all's DNA.
I don't share anything
Jimmy and I drink from the same cup
Just maybe
multiple times.
with you. Not intentional.
No, okay, so I grab it, and so then what? So then you have a sample of your data, you have data that has 2 profiles?
Right.
And how, or what level of confidence do you reach? I mean, how are you going to separate that? I mean, it could have been who done it. Could have been Jimmy. Could have been me.
I'm going with you.
Katherine, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, that varies so widely from profile to profile. Sometimes we're able to determine what we would call a major and a minor, which means that one person contributed more. That would be the major person. Sometimes we would have what we call an indistinguishable mixture, where we couldn't necessarily tease the two apart. With the sexual assault kits, we're often able to use the complainant and pull out the foreign person to that complainant, because you would expect the complainant to be on their own body swabs. So it varies.
I recently tried a capital murder about 2 weeks ago. Gun had they couldn't include anyone, but there was data all over the gun. They couldn't.
Well, you get too complex a mixture, you really ultimately can't interpret it. And
Right.
where that line is of too complex a mixture in order to interpret it. And I mentioned about that Mix 13, that was basically a sample that was sent around that was deliberately a complex mixture, and seeing whether or not laboratories would include or exclude a profile that was not in that mixture.
Is your lab doing anything or leading? What ways is your lab leading the country?
Lots of different ways. I mean, DNA, I think in the DNA area, we probably are more conservative than a lot of laboratories in what we'll interpret, because what we'll interpret up to a 3-person mixture, but not beyond that.
That's actually cutting edge, that's smart.
Well, you know, if saying, no, we can't do something is cutting edge and smart, okay, that's cutting edge and smart to say there's limits, and we won't go beyond those limits.
Do you have is your lab reviewed by anybody?
Yeah, we are. So actually, there's another one here. July, Crime Scene is up for their first accreditation visit. So they're the last section to get accredited. We're accredited by a group called ANAB, ANSI ASQ National Accreditation Board, to ISO 17025 standards. And so with Crime Scene getting accredited, that will have the entire laboratory accredited. And we actually also just got our evidence handling, so the movement of evidence around the laboratory, that's also accredited now.
So we got a couple questions coming in on Twitter. We'll take them one at a time. I want you guys to answer. First one is, why is Houston Forensic Science Center still using Lean Six Sigma when it has been such a failure?
Well, you know, there have been some parts of it within, because we've done a lot of that work in biology, and some of it's worked better than others.
I don't know what that is.
So Lean Six Sigma, there's two components to it. Lean Six really comes out, they're both kind of out of the manufacturing world. Lean Six is philosophically, if you reduce errors, the process typically gets more efficient. And
Sure.
Lean is if we remove waste, the process gets more efficient. I think there are some components that really were more, and I've talked with staff about this, there are components of it that were really my fault, that stuff did not get communicated as well to the staff as ideally we should have. So their buy-in to being able to accept what really becomes greater accountability was rougher. So from that standpoint, yeah, there were some failures in it. Things that were successes out of it is better data of how we look at the process, better data of how we explain it to folks like you all or the mayor's office or the citizens of Houston of why we need to do some of these things, because it's not just, well, we think this is going to work. It's this is going to work because we know we need 12 analysts in order to keep up with what's coming in. We know we need this many people in this section and this many people in this area. So from that standpoint, I think it has been a success. I think learning from places where it hasn't worked and using that now going forward is why to keep using it.
Who funds you and who supports you in the some city council or commissioner's court, whoever?
Well, actually, a lot of that work's been funded out of federal grant money.
Okay.
We've done with that as as an effort to try and build the capacity of the laboratory. And you know, it's gone into a lot of things of changing the management structure. It's gone into a lot of things like realizing that we need a dedicated person for training, because there's a big training need now to get everybody cross-trained, but there will always be a training need as different technologies come in, as different people come in. That will always need to be there. There's always a recurrent training need to keep people fresh on stuff.
So is anybody championing you in local politics?
Actually, yeah. I think we've come a long way in working with city council and with the mayor's office. I think there's a lot more understanding and support, understanding for the complexity of what the laboratory is. I think there's a greater understanding for the fact that really we have done a good job at progressing where we were. You know, they get tired of hearing me say this, of, you know, I'm really pleased with what's happened with the laboratory. I'm really proud of it, but I'm not satisfied yet. We still have work to do. We're not done yet.
So you've been there at least 8 years or so?
Nope, I've been there 3 years, just over
3 years. Pardon me, but you talked about being involved.
Right, so I was with the HPD lab before it became the Houston Forensic Science Center.
Are there independent agencies that are doing their own or have their own forensic departments? And are you connecting to them or talking to them at all?
Well, there's private laboratories that are a little different. They are independent, but they don't have some of the same luxuries as we do. For example, they don't have access to CODIS, and so that's something that we do have. And so the only other independent lab that I really know of is DC's Crime Lab.
And DC's Crime Lab that was taken out from under DC Police and made a separate department within the city there, so they report directly to the mayor.
And so are you getting every precinct, Harris County Sheriff and HPD to you guys?
No, really, HPD is the vast majority of the work that we get. But they're the single largest law enforcement agency in Texas. They're, I think, the 5th or 6th largest law enforcement agency in the country. They will always be the 800-pound gorilla. We get some work out of San Jacinto and Deer Park. I'm trying to think, we got 4 or 5 smaller contracts like that. Like I say, they're really kind of more pilot concepts of how we would do this, but that's not been the focus, because we still need to focus on getting stuff straight for the city of Houston first.
The other question we had coming in on Twitter is why has Houston Forensic Science Center waited so long before properly training their analysts?
Well, it's not that they're not properly trained. What we're talking about is cross-training, because the analysts that are in the jobs that there are very good at what they're doing. It's cross-training people so that we can redeploy people elsewhere. I think it's an important distinction.
Right, and on that note, I mean, I want to kind of follow up on the earlier conversation we had about clearing out the requests with the private lab. So, and kind of go back to the budget conversation you had before. I mean, you're flat. Don't know if you're going to get an increase. I mean, So you get the people that you have, you get them trained up, you're able to clear out this backlog. What's to say we don't get another backlog? How do you prevent that from happening? I mean, I'm assuming you've got a pretty full plated as it is, and probably all the analysts do. So at some point, you know, we clear out this backlog, but what's the plan to prevent it from happening again?
I think a lot of this will help for what we can foresee of growth in particularly DNA. Now, something we see nationally, West Virginia University has published some stuff on this, that for every 1% that turnaround time comes down in laboratories, the number of requests they get goes up by 1.4%. So there is kind of a cycle of, as laboratories get more efficient, I think that's what we've seen, is we've gotten more efficient, the workload's gone up. It's not that the underlying crime rate's gone up, but more requests come in because now investigators and everybody involved in the rest of the system sees, okay, we're going to get an answer now sometime before 3 years. We've wanted that answer all along, so they start asking for it. So
I don't know how you guys are going to be testifying in court every week.
Yep, it's a serious consideration.
Yeah, you guys are going to be, I mean, you
it's
guys
a
are going
serious
to be there every
consideration.
week.
It is a serious consideration, and I think we can overcome some of it. We can carve some efficiencies, and we can get, with what we've got coming in now, I think we can sustainably do this. But if the trends are what the trends are, that the work continues to increase, yeah, we hit a breaking point, and we'll have to, more resources are necessary.
Is it Commissioner's Court? Then?
No, this would be City Council.
City Council.
And Mayor's Office, of where the balance of those resources.
I mean, Katherine, what do you feel like, and I know we're getting close to the end of the show here, but for you, I mean, what do you feel like in a 30-day period, how many cases do you feel like you can adequately handle?
I believe right now we're at 120 cases per month between the 6 of us. So
is that divided out evenly, or I mean, is it depending on the complication of certain cases? How?
It really can vary. We have a wide variety of cases, from cases with only 1 sample to cases that have 20, 25 samples. We often have second round requests on cases from officers. There are times that we don't go to court for months, and then there are times we go to court several times in a week. So it really does vary. I would say for the individual analyst, probably around 25 cases a month is reasonable.
Is it? I'm getting told we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
The last word.
Gosh, I have so many questions.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's good.
This is great.
I really appreciate you guys coming on.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I mean, tough questions are good. I mean, tough questions help us get better.
No, I appreciate it. We thank you all for coming on, and look forward to doing the next 2 shows at some point.
We can talk about guns next time, right? I don't own a gun.
Right up my alley. I told everybody I'd bring my guns to the party. So. But that's all the time we have for this week, everybody. We'd like to thank Dr. Peter Stout, Courtney Head, and Katherine, what was your last name? Katherine Morgan. That's right. We'd like to thank the 3 of y'all for coming on this evening, and we will be back next week with another episode of Reasonable Doubt. Good night.